Thank you, and thank you, everyone. I have been here before, not just generically talking to groups, which I've done for 30 years, but also at Real Truth About Health. I was there in the beginning when it was a 10-day live conference. And Stephen Shore, who's the brain behind it, I used to say, Stephen, you can't do this. You can't have a 10-day conference. People don't have 10 days. You're not going to have the audience that you need. You have to put it online. And you have done a great job, Stephen, and all the people here today who are watching and the vast numbers that'll be watching the recording appreciate the work that you've done and the team at Real Truth About Health. So thank you so much, year after year. I'm going to share my screen here and then show you some things that I'd like you to be aware of. First of all, the name of this talk is Are GMOs and Roundup Causing Your Disease? But there's a panel coming up for those that are watching live. It'll be Wednesday, 4 o'clock Pacific, with my friends Dr. Stephanie Seneff and my friend Dr. Michelle Perro. We have a great time scaring the heck out of everyone and telling the real truth about GMOs and pesticides and chemicals. So I highly recommend that you attend, watch that, and if you can't catch it live, make a note to find it on the recordings. Now, I'm also doing a talk on Monday. For years, I have lived a double life, and I'll explain. The presentation is called How to Use Quantum Consciousness to Transform, Heal, and Awaken Your Magnificence. And on the right is a book that's not yet out. You can't get it in bookstores, at least not while this is live. When this is being presented to those who are watching the recording, you might have better luck. It's called Claiming Your Magic, How to Use Quantum Consciousness to Transform, Heal, and Awaken Your Magnificence. And if you want to know something before the book comes out, go to highestversionofyourself.com. So that's going to be Monday. I'm on Pacific time. It's the same time as now, 2 o'clock Pacific. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And what's interesting is when I wrote my book, Seeds of Deception, I was challenging Monsanto head on. And I was writing down and recording all the ways that they had gotten scientists fired and threatened and stripped of responsibilities and gotten a magazine issue shredded before it could be distributed and a book deal destroyed before the book was published. And they had a 4-part news series stopped at Fox Local News. Anyway, I was aware of their tactics, and I knew that I didn't want them to know about some of the details of my life. So I hid completely the fact that I was doing this remarkable healing and transformation for people, and did it sort of quietly in the background since 2003. And then last year I came out of the closet to my local non-GMO community and said, guess what? So you'll hear on Monday how it's not just woo-woo. There's ways like when I apply my quantum aspect of consciousness to someone who's connected to EEG, their brainwaves change immediately, even if they're in another room down the hall and don't know when I'm working. And the benefits are even way more astounding. So please catch that. I am now merging the two parts of my life. And I'm going to now talk to you about what I've been talking about at The Real Truth all this time, and that's about GMOs and Roundup, which is something that I've been studying and bringing out to the world for a long time. Now, what I want to point out, as you could see on this orange band, is eat organic. That's the bottom line action that I'm going to encourage you to take, because some of what I'm going to say is going to be a bit shocking. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of different diseases, some of which you may have or are trying to avoid, and many of which are being experienced by people that you know. And I want you to know that the immediate action is to eat organic, which doesn't allow GMOs or Roundup. There's many other things you can do that other people can recommend, but this is something that's critical. And I'm giving you the answer beforehand because otherwise it could be agitating, like when you realize you're insomnia or acne or cancer or diabetes or weight problems or depression or heart problems or anxiety or Parkinson's. Oh, I mean, the list is huge. And we're going to go through it and provide evidence that will lead most people to conclude, at the very least, eat organic to avoid this stuff, and more likely that this is perhaps one of the greatest health emergencies or health dangers in the world, the GMOs and Roundup in our food. Now, I want to ask you first, because I'm looking at a list of all the attendees. And if you raise your hand, it goes right to the top. So I want to ask you to raise your hand if you think you eat organic food at least 80% of the time. 80%. So raise your hand, and we're going to see how many of you are in that position. Because what I'd like to do is teach this stuff and then ask you what you plan to do starting, well, your next meal or tomorrow or next whatever. So if you eat organic more than 80% of the time, raise your hand, and you can go down to the bottom under react and then use the caret and then raise your hand, or on the phone, it's a little hard. You have to press it so that it shows up. And I'm seeing more and more hands being raised, 15 now, and there's more and more coming. So I will let that happen for a bit. Now, what we're going to be talking about, one thing that we did at the Institute for Responsible Technology, where I'm the founder, responsibletechnology.org, is we asked people, did you recover from any disease or have any improvements in any disorders when you switched to non-GMO and largely organic food? We asked them what kind of diet they switched to and which disease or disorder occurred. And then we asked them, was it like no change, mild, medium, almost significant, almost gone, completely gone? So we got a sense of it. And that's data that's important. I'm looking at that all of you, thank you for your hands. It looks like there's about 20 people who've raised their hand who say that they eat organic about 80% of the time. Now, we'll leave it there. I'm going to lower your hands, and we're going to see. How am I lowering hands? Usually I can lower all the hands. Okay, tech people, lower the hands. I'll let you do that. All right, now back to this conversation, because the biotech industry has convinced the U.S. government not to require safety studies on GMOs and very little on Roundup, and they lie about what they've put on Roundup. We can talk about that. So we have to be like investigators ourselves and to see what information we can come up with. So here we are. This is the results of that survey. There's 28 different conditions. And I listed those as examples. And the reason I listed those 28 is that I asked people at talks, at the beginning of the talk, what did you notice you improved from when you switched to non-GMO? Because I asked the people what percentage they were eating organic or non-GMO. And I said, how many people noticed improvement in your health? And almost everyone raised their hand when they were asked that general question. I said, okay, what got better? And these are the 28 that got better. And this was at about 150 lectures. And maybe 24 of them were at medical conferences. And I was asking not, did you get better? I was asking, did your patients get better? And so they had thousands of patients being represented there by the doctors. So we had a pretty good idea of the things that were getting better. And the number one improvement was always digestion. And then the second one I combined how many people noticed less fatigue and brain fog, or more energy and less brain fog? And that was always number two. So here we have 85.2% of the people saying they got better from digestive disorders, 60% from fatigue, obesity or overweight, 55%, brain fog, 52%, mood problems like anxiety and depression, 52%, food allergies and sensitivities, 50%, memory and concentration, 48%, joint pain, etc. We're going to go over this a few times because right now it's just a random list. Right now it's just individuals reporting they're getting better from things. And there's a lot of confounding variables. If someone switched to non-GMO, did they also go off of processed foods? Did they also start working out? I mean, it's not a strong survey on its own, but it becomes part of the data that we've collected. Now, I'm going to look at the number one response, and that is digestion. I published, it was peer-reviewed in the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, the results of the survey, and then I looked at all the information that we knew about GMOs and Roundup that affects digestion, since that was the winner, so to speak. And so, is it impacting your bowel dysfunction, GERD, bloating, food allergies and sensitivities, irritable bowel, SIBO, intestinal infection, peritonitis, underweight? So here's some of the evidence that we have. So again, we're going to be investigators looking at evidence. So remember, this is the chart of the people reporting, and here's, I've circled the disorders related to digestion. Now, in truth, if your digestion is off, most of those things can be influenced. And since digestion is off because of GMOs and Roundup, that could actually be in the causal chain to many of these others. But the direct digestive problems, food allergies and sensitivities, gluten sensitivity, although most gluten responses are not digestive, but many are, and then underweight. Now, when I got the results that 85.2% of the people said they got better from digestive disorders, of those people, 80% were either significant improvement, nearly gone, or completely recovered. So not just a minor increase in digestive health, a dramatic increase that was something we saw in 150 lectures and the survey of 3,256 people. And we also asked people about their pets. And it turns out that the pets also had digestive disorders as number one. That did not surprise me. I interviewed Dr. Michael Fox, who wrote a syndicated column called Animal Doctor. And he had 25 to 30 million readers around the time that GMOs were introduced into the human food chain. The byproducts of the human food industry were put into pet food, and so all of a sudden all the cats and dogs were eating GMOs, and he got flooded with letters. People didn't know why their dogs or cats were now having intractable diarrhea and itching, among others. And he wrote back individual letters to all of them and said, stop feeding them GMOs, told them how, and then filled a file cabinet with response letters saying it worked. So this is not a surprise. Nonetheless, coming back, these are some of the reported human benefits to when people switch to non-GMO and largely organic: irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, acid reflux, ulcers, gut pain, and bloating. And livestock also showed improvements. I had a lot of very interesting conversations with farmers. I was speaking at the American Academy of Environmental Medicine year after year, and starting in 2006, and I was invited back in 2009 to receive an environmental medicine award, and I brought a video camera. And I said, if you have experiences prescribing non-GMO diets, to your patients, I'd like to interview you. So I interviewed a bunch of doctors, and the interviews are found on one of my films called Genetic Roulette. And the allergist told me that his patients had higher allergic reactions if they ate GMOs. Another doctor told me that there was more inflammation. And then Dr. Emily Lindner said, I put everyone on non-GMO diets and they all get better. And interestingly enough, I was talking about the dangers of GMOs, including responses in rats that occurred, dramatic responses, in just 10 days. But I never really anticipated that people would notice. I thought it would be some sort of subtle change in the background, in the data, in the statistics. And she said, everyone gets better. And I was skeptical. I said, what percentage? She says, I said all right, 98%. I said, how many patients do you have? And then she took about a minute, and I could see her calculating how many she sees, and it was about 5 years worth. She said about 5,000. And my eyes went wide. And I said, can I show up at your office with a video camera and interview your patients? She said, sure. So I went to the Chicago area, interviewed her patients and her and another doctor who was prescribing non-GMO organic and her patients. And it was remarkable. Someone had lost the symptoms of Crohn's disease in 3 days. Another person, their irritable bowel went away in 3 weeks. Another person, 6 weeks. And when I talked to Dr. Lindner, she put everyone on a non-GMO organic diet, but she also took out the processed foods. So was it the non-GMO portion, or was it the other ingredients in processed foods? There was too many confounding variables to have a level of confidence that it was replicable. But then I went to some farms with the same video crew, and the farmers were saying they took their cows and pigs off of GMOs. Now, there's not gluten-free pigs or dairy-free cows. It was like, that was all they were eating was soy and corn, and it went from GMO to non-GMO, and they got better from digestive problems and other things. The same problems that the people were getting better from. I talked to one guy later from Denmark, and he said he switched to non-GMO soy and didn't tell his farmhand. And the farmhand came up to him 2 days later. He had a lot of pigs. He said, you changed the feed. And my friend said, uh-oh, what happened? He was concerned. And the farmhand said, no more diarrhea. They had intractable diarrhea that was killing a percentage of their piglets. For 2 years, switched to non-GMO, it was gone. I talked to this one, I was speaking in the Pacific Northwest. I got picked up at the airport. There was someone in the shuttle with me. It was a farmer conference. He was a farm consultant. And he said he put one of his farmers on non-GMO, one of his pig farmers from Nebraska. And, or was it Iowa? So I called up the pig farmer, and what happened was that after 3 days on a non-GMO corn diet, they were still feeding soy, the pig started being more active and started changing. He was walking in the nursery, and he was looking at his 3,000 pigs, and they were acting a little different. And he said, why are the pigs acting different? And one of the brothers said, could be that non-GMO corn, as a joke. And they laughed with a cynical laugh. But 11 days later, after he had switched, he called the farm consultant and said, I turned to non-GMO, and it was like hard to explain what was going on. The consultant was like, uh-oh, what happened? Now, this farmer who I've spoken to, at a certain point, 14 years before, his job among the brothers was to take care of the nursery, 3,000 piglets. And that was supposedly the easiest job on the farm, and he was always chided by his brothers because he had the easiest job. But then 14 years ago, before I spoke to him, it became one of the hardest jobs because all these pigs were getting sick. They were getting infections and viruses and bacteria. He was constantly injecting them, and they were sickly. He would come in and bring the the corn, the feed, and that would get them up because they were just like lying down. And before he even left their pen, they were lying down again because they were just so sick. And they blamed it on the new genetics, the new different pigs that were coming into the area, particularly from Canada. So they were blaming it on Canadian bacon. But when he switched to non-GMO corn, within 2 weeks, the pigs started acting like they used to, and they stopped needing all those injections. I think his injection rate went down by 2/3, and another one by 75%. And he was blown away that it was all the time the GMO feed. Now, we don't eat as much GMO corn as the pigs do. But I remember talking to a Monsanto scientist that I met, former Monsanto scientist, and he told me that when they fed corn to pigs, no, to rats for 90 days, there was dramatic evidence of harm. And instead of withdrawing the corn, they rewrote the study to hide the effects. And he told me he was very concerned about the people in Southern Africa who eat corn 3 times a day as a staple. When Monsanto feeds rats in their so-called safety studies, the maximum amount of corn they feed is 33%, and the maximum time is 90 days. The people in Southern Africa were eating far more than 33% of corn in their diet, and they're eating it lifelong. So he clued me in to the problem. I was speaking to an American veterinarian, and he had at one point a South African client. And the client was having terrible problems with his cows and pigs. The pigs were like sometimes cannibalistic and aggressive, and the cows weren't producing much, and it was psychological, physiological, and production. And the veterinarian gave him all sorts of things to do. And the guy said, just tell me one thing. I can't do all of that. And he said, okay, never feed another GMO again. So the farmer had been growing GMO corn in South Africa and feeding it to his animals. So his animals were eating 100% GMO corn, not the mixture between GM and non-GM that you'd get if you ordered it from the field, from the market. So he switched to non-GMO corn and started feeding it to the pigs and cows, and they got better. And then he ran out, and then he had to buy corn from the marketplace, and he fed them, and they got worse again. And by that, then he had enough corn planted so that he became 100%. Now, he had farm workers that were working for him, and they were eating the same GM corn that he had grown for the cows 3 times a day as a staple, and they were getting sick. And he said they were spending a lot of money on their runny nose, flu symptoms, severe headaches, and a lot of them were just out, could not work. So he had to hire 60 workers when he only needed 50, so 20% more, because 20% of his workers were usually sick, too sick to work. And so when he switched the corn for the pigs and cows to be non-GMO, his workers started eating non-GMO, and their health got better. All the problems disappeared. Now, the veterinarian told me this, that he'd been told by the farmer while they were eating the GMO corn in vast amounts, once or twice a month, one of his workers would be talking to him and his eyes would move in different trackings. They wouldn't go parallel. They would just start to cross or go wide. And the farmer knew that within 1 or 2 days, they would be dead. He didn't know why. He didn't know what was causing the tracking. He just knew that he had seen it once or twice a month. That stopped also when they switched to non-GMO corn. Then they ran out of corn, had to get corn from the market, things reverted. That's an example of human beings that are eating more GMOs than we are, perhaps than anyone in the world. And it was probably the cause of this high death rate and high sickness rate. So they were the canaries in the coal mine on our behalf, sort of showing us what could happen if we're not careful. And we need to be very careful about this new gene editing stuff, which I'll explain shortly. All right, so the livestock had diarrhea, gut bacteria imbalance, intestinal damage. Animal feeding studies showed gut bacteria problems, severe stomach inflammation, stomach lesions, excessive growth or damage of intestinal villi, reduced ability to digest. Here's a picture of the intestinal walls of rats fed genetically engineered potatoes that never went to the market. And here's the stomach lining. This is potentially precancerous cell growth. And I know the scientist very well. He passed since. His name is Dr. Arpad Pustai. The whole first chapter of Seeds of Deception is about him. And he said, this is not from the particular genetically engineered quality of the potatoes. This is from the generic process of making a GMO. And all the products on the market come from the same process that caused this, as well as many other problems. The BT corn. Now, let me explain what BT corn is. Let me catch you up for those that may not know what a GMO is and why it's a good idea to eat non-GMO. GMO means genetically modified organism. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can take genes from other species and insert it into the DNA, or you can rearrange and edit the genes in the DNA of a particular species. You do it in order to create a trait. The two main traits of the GMO crops are either designed to be sprayed with an herbicide, particularly Roundup, which is the chief poison is called glyphosate, or it produces its own toxic insecticide called BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis. Now, that means that if we eat corn that is Roundup ready, it's been sprayed with Roundup, and there's Roundup residues in that corn. So we're eating the Roundup. If it has BT toxin, meaning it's producing an insecticide, that the plant is registered as an insecticide, then we're eating an insecticide. So they fed this BT toxin to rats, and they found that it turns out it caused damaged intestines. Now, the BT toxin is designed to damage intestines. That's how it kills insects. It'll kill a caterpillar that's chewing the corn by poking holes in the guts of that caterpillar, causing it to die. And here it's showing that it's causing a problem in rats as well. Here's the stomach of pigs. On the left, it's normal color. On the right, it's red, inflamed, it's ulcerated. This came from, I introduced a scientist from Australia to a farmer in western Iowa. They got together and did this research, fed two sets of pigs, brought them to the slaughterhouse, but asked the slaughterhouse to hold back the organs, and they found that the stomachs of the pigs that were eating the GMO soy and corn were horrible. They had to create a whole new category of irritation that they had never seen before in the normal feed-fed pigs. Now, glyphosate, which is the chief poison in Roundup, it damages the microvilli, the little fingers along the intestinal walls that do the digestion, and it suppresses digestive enzymes, which can create all sorts of health issues, allergies and mineral deficiencies, etc. Now, in human studies, they took the BT from corn and put it on human cells that normally line the intestines, and it created holes, the same holes that it creates in the insects to kill them. And it was creating that in high concentrations in the petri dish in the laboratory. We don't know if it's poking holes in human cells as we eat, but certainly could be. Now, glyphosate is an antibiotic. I want to tell a little story here. Glyphosate was originally patented as a descaler to clean the mineral deposits on industrial boilers and pipes. That's because it grabs minerals. It's a chelator. It combines with minerals in a very big way, and then it strips these pipes and boilers. So they pour this glyphosate through the boilers, and then they'd let it out into the ground, and it would kill all the plants. So Monsanto bought it and patented it as an herbicide. But they also patented it as a biocide, antibiotic, listing all these different bacteria that it kills. And it turns out in a chemical waste dump near their factory, they found bacteria that wasn't dying in the presence of glyphosate. So they figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene out of that bacteria that allowed it to survive and put it into soybeans and corn and canola and cotton and sugar beets and alfalfa, creating Roundup ready crops. But it turns out that the glyphosate, which is in the crops because it goes into the crop and then it gets concentrated into the food portion and we eat it, it still is an antibiotic. So it's still killing off the microbiome inside us. And as you can see in this slide, in bees, poultry, rats, zebrafish, cows, earthworms, and as well as humans. Now, there was a study done where they took a fake human gut, a simulated human gut, which you can see in the picture, and they fed it first, they inoculated it with feces from a 3-year-old girl who had never been vaccinated, never received antibiotics, and lived in a rural area in Scandinavia and had an all organic diet. So it was like really good microbiome. And they fed it food for a while, and then they added Roundup. And they added Roundup for a period of time, and they noticed that all of these things, low diversity, low short chain fatty acids, drop in bacteria that inhibit inflammation, ammonia, etc. And irritable bowel disorder is driven by many of these things. And this is what's happening in the guts of people who have Roundup. And who has Roundup? The people that don't eat organic. Because it's not only in Roundup ready foods, you'll see in a minute it's in other foods as well. Now, healthy gut bacteria is foundational. If you're not yet aware of it, spend a little time doing an internet search on the importance of the human microbiome. It's incredible. When there's imbalances, it can determine whether we're sick or healthy, whether we're fat or skinny. It can even affect our mood, behavior, and desires, whether we want to be with people or not. Now, I asked Dr. Kiran Krishnan, or he's not a doctor, Kiran Krishnan, who was part of the study, which one of these 28 different conditions that people reported getting better from could possibly have been caused or exacerbated by the changes in the gut bacteria from the previous slide. And he looked at each of them, and he told me, I interviewed him about this, I have it recorded. He'd say, okay, digestive problems. And he'd describe what exactly would happen and how the problems in the gut bacteria would lead to digestive problems. And okay, that one. I said, what about fatigue? He described that one. What about overweight? Every single one of them, every single one of these 28 could be caused or promoted by the same changes in the human gut bacteria that was found in that simulated gut model. Now, glyphosate also promotes leaky gut, which are creating holes or gaps between the cell walls of our intestines. There's an article written by a Harvard professor that said all disease comes from leaky gut. So we had that list of 28 different conditions, every one of which could be exacerbated just by the gut bacteria alone. Each of them could be exacerbated by leaky gut. Glyphosate blocks mineral absorption. Why? Because it's a chelator. It grabs onto it. That's what it was originally patented for. So when you starve your body of minerals, Minerals are critical for certain biological reactions. Uh, it's like the foreman. All the workers are there sitting around until the foreman arrives, they're not working. Until the mineral arrives, nothing's happening. Mineral deficiency is linked to way more than the diseases that are listed on that other page. Damaging the mitochondria. Mitochondria is linked to many, many diseases, including cancer, aging, etc. Mitochondria is the energy power of the cell, brain problems, and it inhibits detoxification. Now, the liver is a normal detoxifier, and glyphosate suppresses the ability of the liver to get rid of toxins. So that means it's like the king of all toxins. You have many, many toxins that we're exposed to. But when you have glyphosate, many of those toxins will stick around and continue to hurt you, to poison you, because the glyphosate has dismantled the efficiency of the mechanism. For those that know the biology, it's the P450 cytochrome pathway or the NRF2 detoxification methods in the cells. So all of these are foundational. So glyphosate is linked to lots of different diseases. Now, I'm going to show you these epidemiological charts. This is the amount of glyphosate sprayed on soy and corn in the United States. Started to grow up in 1996 when Roundup Ready crops were introduced. And then these vertical bars are the amount of inflammatory bowel disease. So in the beginning, it was just over here. And then you'll see it rose dramatically after Roundup was introduced into the human food supply in the United States. Now, I'm going to show you a lot of charts. I have to say, these are not causation, they're correlation. You can't say from the chart alone that Roundup caused the problem. If that were the only evidence, it would be very weak. Because maybe something else is causing the change at the same time, and that just happens to be going up coincidentally. But when you have the other evidence that we talked about, you have the influence of the Bt toxin on guts, on the intestinal walls, the influence of glyphosate, you have the influence of all the different ways that it could damage digestion and create inflammatory bowel. You have the 3,256 people reported in a survey, 85.2%. So you have the plausible causative pathways, you have animal feeding studies, you have livestock, and you have human and clinical reports. So this tells you that this correlation has a lot of other data to support the likelihood of causation. So I'm going to present you with jaw-dropping correlations over this hour, and I believe that they are all indicative of a causation because we have the other evidence. We have why GMOs, Roundup, and Bt toxin could be causing these things. And we have the fact that pets and livestock and humans got these problems when they started eating the GMOs, got rid of the problems when they stopped, and the animal feeding studies, when they force-fed them GMOs or Roundup, ended up having these diseases or their precursors. Typically, they're precursors because they don't feed them long enough. So this is age-adjusted deaths due to intestinal infection. Now, you don't have to read the title. You can just look at the slope of the line. And that's, again, glyphosate and the death rate from intestinal infection. This is hospital discharge of peritonitis. This is based on glyphosate on wheat. I'll explain why it's sprayed on wheat a little later. This is irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease, and acres of Bt corn. Remember, the corn pokes holes in intestinal walls in high concentrations in a laboratory and possibly in us when we eat the corn. This is functional bowel disorder and acres of Bt corn. Now, glyphosate, here's why it's sprayed on wheat. It's sprayed on many crops as a desiccant to dry it down. Now, it's sprayed on Roundup Ready crops because then you can kill all of the weeds, but the crops are designed not to die when sprayed with Roundup. So normally if you spray Roundup on soybeans, they'll die. But Roundup Ready soybeans, they have that little gene from the bacteria that survive. So they're going to survive, and it'll just kill all of the other plant biodiversity. But if you sprayed it on wheat, it would kill the wheat. It doesn't kill it instantly, it first dries it down. So what they do is they spray it on wheat 3 to 5 days before harvest. It dries it down, then they harvest it, makes it easier to harvest. It also causes the ripening to happen very quickly. So it's used especially in higher longitudes, when it's more northerly, when it's colder, because they want to speed up the ripening before it gets too cold. And they also end up cleaning all the weeds for the next season when they grow in the spring. So it's very convenient for farmers, and it's sprayed on the grains, and it's sprayed on the legumes, the beans. So it's in wheat, especially in oats. It's in mung beans and lentils and chickpeas. So no more hummus, because that's made of chickpeas, unless it's organic, because that stuff is soaked in Roundup or glyphosate-based herbicides. Here's celiac disease. I'm going to share some information about celiac. Years ago, I was asked to attend a press conference in New York called Beyond Gluten Sensitivity. And Mary's Gone Crackers, that has both gluten-free and organic, invited me to speak, and Dr. Mark Hyman and a chef. And I had been sitting with an idea for a number of years that glyphosate and GMOs were promoting the gluten sensitivity explosion. So I called a friend of mine and said, who's the king of gluten sensitivity? And they told me Tom O'Brien, who has since become a close friend. And I said, Tom, here's my theory, and here's my evidence. Yeah, the GMOs and the Roundup, they cause inflammation, check. They cause leaky gut, check. They cause imbalanced gut bacteria, check. They cause an immune system response throughout the system, check. They cause the suppression of digestive enzymes, check. All the things that I described would promote gluten sensitivity. Since then, we now know that glyphosate works with zonulin in a way. Zonulin allows for the leaky gut. There's very specific metabolic pathways that have been discussed that I've shared on conferences before. Now there's like overwhelming evidence that glyphosate, and probably GMOs as well, are driving gluten sensitivity. So here, my friend Stephanie Seneff, who I'll be on a panel with, looked at glyphosate on wheat and found that that was rising in parallel with celiac disease. Now, what I did is I wrote a white paper, and I asked Stephanie Seneff and Tom O'Brien and some Tom Moltaire and others to contribute as a support to the white paper. And then Stephanie said, I can't give you too much information because I'm about to publish something on glyphosate, gluten sensitivity, and celiac disease. And sure enough, after I put out my white paper, she put out a much more scholarly paper that's published with another co-author. And it basically linked the biochemistry of glyphosate with everything that they knew about gluten sensitivity and celiac. And I interviewed Stephanie. I said, was there anything that didn't fit? And she says, no, it was hand in glove. Every single symptom of celiac or gluten sensitivity could be explained by glyphosate. So if you are glutenly sensitive, like how I did that, if you are glutenly sensitive, you need to be organic, or at least when you can't eat organic, avoid the foods that are high in glyphosate. And you can find at responsibletechnology.org a list of all these different foods and the amount of glyphosate residues on them, because the US government doesn't do that. We did some testing, Moms Across America did some testing, your Environmental Working Group did some testing. So we just collected them all for you to look at. So go to responsibletechnology.org and you're going to know to avoid wheat and avoid oats and all the legumes for the high levels of glyphosate. Organics are not allowed to use glyphosate, but there can be drift. It's in the air, it's in the rain. So a small detectable level is sometimes found in organics as well. Now, what's interesting is in the beginning days when GMOs were introduced, people got flooded with reports of animals that would avoid eating the GMOs. Geese would land in a field every year, and then when they put half the field was Roundup Ready soy, they all went to the non-GMO and ate that like a line down the center of the field. When they fed pigs GMO corn, they wouldn't eat it. One guy bought a bunch of GMO corn and his cows wouldn't eat it. So he put on the trough, he put non-GMO corn on the bottom and GMO corn on the top. So they had to eat through the GMO corn to get to the non-GMO corn. And so we had stories of rats, mice, cattle, pigs, squirrels, geese, dogs, elk, chickens, deer, raccoons, and buffaloes, all avoiding GMOs when given a chance. Now, one of the stories, and these stories are in my book, Seeds of Deception. One of the stories is about nailing corn on the cob on trees. One tree GMO corn, one tree non-GMO corn over the winter, and then seeing if the squirrels would eat it. And squirrels wouldn't eat the GMO. Take a little bite, and that's it. So I know I talked to a farmer. He said his neighbor, he wanted to replicate it. So he bought a bag of GMO corn and a bag of non-GMO corn and then forgot about it. He never nailed it to the tree. But then later he discovered the bags of corn, and the mice had done the research for him. They had burrowed into both bags of corn, just nibbled the GMO corn, and that was it. They were not going to have any more. The non-GMO corn, completely eaten. I actually have a cob of each behind me on the bottom of my bookshelf. I can hold up if you want. So yeah, you're eating the stuff the animals rejected. So let's take a look at energy levels. We mentioned in the survey that it was very, very high. Fatigue was 60%. Brain fog was 52%. Insomnia, which can give rise to energy problems, was 33%. Almost exactly 1/3 of the people. So let's see what other evidence besides self-reports are available to talk about energy. Now, we know that brain fog and fatigue can come about if you don't have enough minerals. What does glyphosate do? It grabs onto the minerals, doesn't let go, makes them unavailable to the body. It also damages the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the energy centers. So right there we have causative pathways as to why Roundup may be causing fatigue. Remember the pigs that were unable to even stand during the day when they started being fed Roundup Ready stuff? Exhausted. Now sleep is also damaged. I'm going to describe this because this is something that Monsanto was proud of in terms of trying to say that glyphosate did not hurt human beings because we didn't have what's called the shikimate pathway. So the shikimate pathway is a particular biochemical pathway. Are you guys watching this? Here we go. So you can see gut bacteria, however, in human beings, does use the shikimate pathway. So we do rely on the shikimate pathway. We don't have it in our cells, but our gut bacteria have it. And glyphosate stops its function. It interferes with the shikimate pathway. What does the shikimate pathway do in gut bacteria? It produces L-tryptophan, also tyrosine and phenylalanine, the aromatic amino acids. But let's look just at the L-tryptophan. It produces it mostly in our gut. What does that do? Converts to serotonin. 90% of the serotonin is made in our gut, all from tryptophan, a lot of it made by our own gut bacteria. And that's converted to melatonin. And melatonin is in charge of circadian rhythms. So if you don't have enough melatonin, you might not fall asleep. If you don't have enough serotonin, you may not have enough melatonin. If you don't have enough tryptophan, you see where I'm going? So the gut bacteria in our bodies has shut down, to some extent, in the presence of glyphosate, the ability to produce these aromatic amino acids, including tyrosine, which produces dopamine, which is linked to Parkinson's disease, and serotonin and dopamine are the happy chemicals. So that's related to a whole bunch of things, which we haven't gotten to yet. Talked to my friend Zach Bush. He said, the shikimate pathway also produces the human medicine cabinet. All these different endogenous, human-made medicine compounds are produced in the shikimate pathway, but not if it's shut down by glyphosate. Now, insomnia was way up with the introduction of glyphosate on the soy and corn. If you look at the left, it says R equals 0.9749. That's the correlation coefficient. It's how tightly the two slopes are linked. And hospital discharge of sleep disorders, same thing. Very, very tightly correlated, 0.9876. If you go to the film Secret Ingredients at secretingredientsfilm.com, you can see people who switch to an organic diet getting better from all sorts of issues. I won't be a plot spoiler, but one of them was brain fog. And many people reported, including doctors, talking about their patients that got better when they switched to organic food and they just woke up. Now, are GMOs and Roundup a factor in your cancer? It turns out the World Health Organization called glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. You may already know that. And 4.8% of the people in our survey said that switching to non-GMO and largely organic helped them in their cancer. And it was a significant, again, most of them were significant improvements. Scientific research, you could see these three sets of rats have these big bulges. Those are tumors. When they got to be 25% of their body weight, they were euthanized or killed because they considered it to be inhumane. I think feeding glyphosate to the rats was inhumane. Here's how they work. Here's how it worked. Monsanto would feed rats 33% corn for 90 days and say, oh, the rats are fine. They would ignore changes that occurred in their physiologies. Either they wouldn't talk about them or they would say they were not, they may have been statistically significant, but they would say they're not biologically significant or not treatment related. Now, if you're reading that and it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, you might think, oh, it's not biologically significant or it's not treatment related. But if you talk to an actual good scientist, they say there's no such thing. You look for statistical significance and then you isolate why that may be the case. So all of these different problems they were having in their 90 days, they would just ignore it. They would ignore it, but they would also do things like they'd compare rats that were fed Roundup and Roundup ready crops, and then they would compare them to controls. They were eating a diet of rat chow purchased from the market, which had Roundup and GMOs. So they didn't really have a good control group. Or they would change the statistical methods, making it really hard There's all sorts of ways that they rig their research, and we've caught them red-handed. So one very brilliant toxicologist, Dr. G.E. Seralini from France, he was reviewing all of the submissions to France as well as to the EU. And he looked at Roundup Ready corn, and there was more than 50 different statistically significant changes in the physiology of the rats that suggested serious problems could be happening later in their lives after the 90-day cutoff. So if you know about Monsanto, they, as I say, they try and get scientists fired, lose funding, discredit. So Seralini secretly raised the money for a study and did a study on a group of rats that were fed Roundup Ready corn. And some of them were fed the corn that had not been sprayed with Roundup. Some were fed the corn that were sprayed with Roundup. And some were fed Roundup in the water, but they were eating natural corn, compared to those eating a natural organic diet of corn, same diet, but just not GMO or Roundup. Now, he had a clean feed he was feeding his control group. So he was using rats that are prone to cancer, and in all the studies that were normally done, 70 to 80% of the control group would get cancer. But his were only like 10% because his control group was not eating GMOs and Roundup, just the experimental group. So when he got these strong results, and I'll show you the results again, so you can understand why the industry was so concerned. This group of rats were fed GMO corn, but they were not sprayed. The corn was not sprayed with Roundup. The middle was the Roundup sprayed on the corn, fed to the rats, and then the right were the rats that had Roundup in their drinking water, but they were eating regular corn. So all of them had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. All of them, whether they're eating GMOs, Roundup, or both together. So when this came out, there was an effort to discredit Seralini, and it was a classic Monsanto thing where I had all these front groups, all these independent scientists that they were paying, these farm organizations, and they jumped on him and said, you couldn't be getting the right results because your control group wasn't getting sick enough. He explained that. It couldn't get the right groups because you used the wrong rats. Well, they're the same rats that Monsanto used. You couldn't be getting the right results because your size of your rats was too small, the same size that Monsanto used in their study that got their stuff approved. So that's an example of, and the echo chamber of disinformation suppress the research or suppress the reporting on this research. And it should have stopped GMOs and Roundup, but the special interests and the disinformation was just too strong. So let's look at some more evidence of cancer. Kidney and renal pelvic cancer, and here we're comparing it not only to glyphosate applied to corn and soy, but to the percentage of acres that were planted in GMO soy and corn. So both have a very high parallel slope. This is liver cancer, liver and bile duct cancer, thyroid cancer, deaths from leukemia, breast cancer, and we're getting to the next question. Are metabolic diseases caused by GMOs and Roundup? So take a look at the list. These are pretty serious diseases. Diabetes, obesity, hormone problems, thyroid, hormone, dopamine, serotonin, all these lipoprotein metabolism. So many people reported getting better in terms of overweight or obesity, about 55%, hormonal problems, 30%, and diabetes, 10.6, or about 11%. Let's see what else we know. Animals that were fed GMOs or Roundup, mostly GMOs in this case, had insulin regulation problems, and hormone problems. Diabetes, this is a age-adjusted. See that green straight line? That's the trend prior to 1993. If no big change had occurred, that's what would be expected to occur on an age-adjusted basis. Here's what actually happened correlated with glyphosate and the percentage of GMO soy and corn. Diabetes. Deaths from obesity, very similar. Deaths from disorders of lipoprotein metabolism. Liver and kidney problems. All these: kidney failure, fatty liver, hepatitis C, liver and kidney cancer. Kidney disease was reported by 4.5% of our 3,256 people as getting better. And people reported getting better both in kidney disease and in fatty liver. I'd interviewed a veterinarian who was a large animal veterinarian in the Midwest. And he said when GMOs were introduced, there was a huge change in the gut bacteria of his cows. Clostridium A, I think it was became toxic, and it was fine before. He had to create kind of a yogurt from a healthy gut of an animal and feed it to the animals. He would do autopsies of animals that died. He said the liver looked like a bomb went off in it. So the people on the ground were seeing the difference of the pre and the post. Now, a lot of veterinarians that came on the scene after 1996, when GMOs became a big part of the feed, never saw what animals were supposed to look like. So they may think, oh, that's the way livers look. That's the way bodies look. And so they're missing the actual impact of the GMOs and the Roundup because they don't have a before and after. So in animal feeding studies, they saw toxicity and damage in the liver and kidneys, spleen, pancreas, enzyme disturbances, etc. On the left, you see rat livers from the control group. On the right, rats that were fed GM soy. Clear differences. One on the right is disgusting. Now, Roundup causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at very low doses. We're talking about low parts per trillion. The amount of glyphosate that caused in the water, that caused the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in rats on a per body weight per day basis was, I think, 257,000 times less than the allowable glyphosate levels in US drinking water by the EPA. They do not look at low dose effects. This was a hugely low dose effect. Now, if glyphosate is causing fatty liver disease at such low levels, we would expect an epidemic of fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And guess what? There's an epidemic. 25 to 30% of the US population. Now, symptoms include fatigue, weakness, weight loss, loss of appetite, nausea, abdominal pain, yellowing of skin. And there's worse versions. There's alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is a more advanced form. And then you can end up getting into liver cancer and cirrhosis liver cancer. Now, when they looked at people with the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and they looked at the amount of glyphosate in their urine, those that had the more advanced steatohepatitis, however you pronounce it, they had more glyphosate in their urine than the other group. So we're just chowing down on glyphosate and becoming sick in tens of millions of numbers, just tremendous numbers. Here's the hospitalizations for acute kidney injury, death from kidney failure, hepatitis C. Now, are GMOs contributing to neurological disorders? Autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, schizophrenia, brain fog, mood. These are all mental disorders. neurological disorders. If you look at our list, brain fog, anxiety, depression, memory and concentration, other mental disorders, autism, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, all described by people as getting better to some degree when they took the GMOs and Roundup out of their diet. Deaths from Alzheimer's, very tightly correlated with GMOs and Roundup. Death from Parkinson's, same thing. Dementia, deaths from senile dementia. ADHD, anxiety, schizophrenia, suicide by overdose, autism in 6-year-olds. Now, this autism chart, this chart is different than the others. They didn't just use 1 year of glyphosate, like looking at the amount of glyphosate in a particular year compared to the disease rate of that year. They added all of the glyphosate from the previous 3 years. This is autism in 6-year-olds. So they would have liked to have done the previous 6 years, but because the data didn't have that available, they did the current year and the previous 3 years, showing an accumulation of exposure to people with the amount of glyphosate in the food. And as they did that, and didn't do it just for the same year, much more intelligent this way, the correlation coefficient became much higher. Take a look at it on the left-hand side, 0.9972. Take a look at the slope. It's nearly perfect. So is glyphosate causing autism? One of the people that I'm going to be in a panel with, let's change the later, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She is an expert at big data analysis. She's got a PhD in computer modeling and computations and all that, as well as a degree in biology. She's a senior researcher at MIT. And she took down all of the data, all the scientific data on what was happening in the bodies of autistic people. And because she's a biochemical geek, she said to me, I know why all those symptoms are occurring because I can tell you from what's happening in their physiology. But I can't tell you what environmental insult is causing that change in the physiology, or at least she couldn't for a while. So she pulled down all the data on all the environmental toxins that she could find, everything that she knew. It didn't fit. None of the characteristics of the different agrochemicals and other chemicals could explain those changes. Then she went to a lecture by a friend of mine, Dr. Don Huber, who's an expert at glyphosate, and he was talking about glyphosate and the fact that it was an antibiotic, the fact that it was a chelator, all these different qualities. Stephanie Seneff told me later she was sitting at the edge of her seat for 2 hours. It was perfect. She got home and took all the data that existed online in every scientific journal, pulled down the big data, did an analysis, and said, this is what I've been looking for. This is driving autism. So we have a lot of biochemical, plausible and very plausible causative pathways, biochemical pathways. What's happening in the gut? What's happening? She's a biochemical genius. I don't try and replicate the work that she has. Please join us at the panel and also watch her individual talk. I'm not sure if he's going to speak about this, but she's amazing. If you go to the film Secret Ingredients at secretingredientsfilm.com, you could see 2 families that had autistic boys. When they switched to organic, the kids are no longer on the spectrum. And Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who will also be joining, Dr. Michelle Perro, who will be joining Stephanie Seneff and I, she's a pediatrician, and she said sometimes dietary intervention, putting kids on a organic diet, is all you need to reduce, to take someone out of the spectrum, but sometimes it takes a lot of other things. But one of the most important things you do is to put the kids on an organic diet. It doesn't work every time in terms of getting them off the spectrum, but it's critical. Because she found, and this is a very interesting story, she found that her kids were getting all sorts of complex diseases around early 2000. And it was much harder to treat them, and she didn't know why. She was part of a group in Marin County where I was visiting at the time, and she was trying to stop the spray of something for a particular moth. And I came to speak, and she learned about GMOs, and someone asked her, have she read my book? And I may have given her the book. Anyway, she looked at my book and went, oh my God, the changes in the stomach lining and the changes in the intestinal walls that I showed you earlier from the potato. She goes, this is what's happening to the children. This is the problem. This is why I'm getting more complex, more serious, harder to treat cases. So she started putting kids on organic diets, and they started getting better, and she was able to treat them. So she's written a book, What's Making Our Children Sick. So she says her experience that, she'll put a whole family on organic because the son has autism, and then the sister's ADHD goes away, and the mother loses weight, and the father's kidney condition reverses because everyone's now on an organic diet. She's not treating those other three. She's just telling the whole family, for the sake of your son, go on an organic diet, and everyone gets better. I know I'm convincing you, some of you, to eat organic, and we're going to have a show of hands in a few minutes. Reproductive disorders, birth defects, menstrual problems, infertility, polycystic ovary syndrome, low sperm count, mobility, premature birth. All right, there's a lot of evidence here. Menstrual problems, 13% of people said they got better. Infertility, 3.8%. Livestock, miscarriages, birth defects, infertility, conception rate, litter size, dramatic. If you look at my film, Genetic Roulette, there's a whole description of massive livestock infertility. Animal feeding studies, all sorts of problems with fertility and birth. Birth defects, infant mortality, changes in the uterus and testes. You could take a look at that slide. It's like animal feeding studies show a lot of problems. Glyphosate promotes birth defects. They've injected it into frogs and chickens and were able to reproduce the birth defects that were common in Argentina in the areas that were sprayed by plane when they spray glyphosate, and it happens to land all over peasant villages as they're spraying the nearby fields. The birth defect rate in one hospital went up 71-fold, I think. Now, these rats, this is a picture, I was speaking at the European Parliament many years ago, and I also speaking was a senior researcher of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Dr. Irina Ermakova. So she gave me this slide. It's Russian-speaking rats. She fed the rats the group GMO soy starting 3 weeks before they got pregnant, or 2 weeks before they got pregnant, through the entire pregnancy and into lactation. And there's greater than a 50% death rate compared to only 10% of the female rats that ate non-GMO soy. Huge death rate. The animals that ate the GMO soy, that were born from the GMO soy fed mothers, were much smaller. And they also had reproductive problems. They were having difficulty reproducing. Another Russian scientist did a three-generation study on hamsters. And they found most lost the ability to have babies by the third generation. They were also slower growth, so smaller. They also died at a higher rate, 4 to 5 times. And some had a birth defect of hair growing in their mouths. Mice fed GM soy had problems with their testicles, female rats fed GM soy had changes in the uterus and ovaries. Here's the picture from the Russian Academy of Sciences. A normal looking rat testicle on the left, and it changed color in the rats that were fed GM soy. I like to take a long, slow drink of water or something while I let this picture marinate and affect the behavior of half of the listeners. Compelling. So I interviewed Dr. Skinner, who's been doing epigenetic studies. He injected Roundup into pregnant rats, and they were okay, and their offspring was pretty okay, but the offspring's offspring, the grandchildren, were not okay. And the offspring's offspring, the great-grandchildren, were terrible. 90% showed serious issues like kidney disease and birth defects and difficulty getting pregnant and overweight, etc. Now, in this country, we see the amount of glyphosate spray applied to corn and soy is correlated with congenital birth defects. I'm going to go through all these slides very quickly. You just look at the slope of the lines. Congenital heart defects and enlarged right ventricle, newborn metabolic disorders, newborn genitourinary disorders, skin disorders, newborns with lung conditions and pulmonary bleeding and allergic reaction, newborn eye disorders, immune-related newborn blood disorders, lymph disorders. Okay. Next, not to mention hypertension, stroke, anemia, skin disorders, and autoimmune disease. Okay, let's just fly through these. Many of the other ones that I just mentioned are here: joint pain, seasonal allergies, gluten sensitivity, hormonal problems, musculoskeletal pain, autoimmune disease, high blood pressure, eczema, asthma. We're just going to look at some charts. Hypertension, deaths from stroke, anemia. Okay, I think we've done that. So, what are we going to do? I'm going to make a suggestion. If at this point you are motivated to make a change in your diet, then I recommend not forgetting some of this stuff. Get on our newsletter, go to our website, responsibletechnology.org. There's a $25 a month program you can do to join a self-care advocacy community where we put the best of our stuff in for you. For healthcare practitioners, we have another one. We have programs and courses for you there. That helps us continue to go, and it keeps you moving forward. But I want to ask, how many of you, we had about 20 people that ate about 80% of their diet as organic. How many people plan to have their diet now going forward at least 80% organic? Or, if you grow your own, count it as that. So raise your hand if you are intending to have at least 80% of your diet organic, or at least non-GMO and no glyphosate. We're seeing the hands go up. Including those that already have. Not just the ones that are planning to, but include the 20 of you which raised your hand already. Raise your hand again. Let's get the full count. I want to see if this knowledge has organizing power, if this is going to change your lifestyle and possibly your life. So anyone that's planning to eat, at least not everyone can do it. If you're in jail, you may not have it if you're, eating at home and you can't convince your parents. And if you want to convince your parents, the best way is to show them the film, Secret Ingredients. Go to secretingredientsfilm.com. All right? Now, I'm not seeing a huge difference already. Did I fail? Are people holding back? You see, usually what I do is I say how many people are eating 20%, 40%. I usually have a lot more time. All right, so someone said there's a very limited variety in organic. Yeah, yeah, there's a limited amount. And there's also online ordering, farmers markets, buying in bulk so that things are cheaper. We have a 90-day lifestyle upgrade that I've offered. 90, I don't know how to get to it. It's probably at livehealthybewell.com or something, where we teach people how to eat organic and do it on a save time and save money. I was interviewing one person that had a organic distribution company, and he was feeding people, his family, organic breakfast for like $1.55 per person. He was describing how he did it. In the film Secret Ingredients, a main character describes that you can feed an entire family of 5 an organic meal for less than $20. So there's ways to do it. All right, let's lower the hands. Usually I can lower the hands, but for some reason.
I got it.
Okay, thanks. I'm the co-host and not the co-host. Okay, so I'd like to recommend that you go to responsibletechnology.org, and when you can't eat organic, at least do 2 things. Buy non-GMO, so avoid the soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, zucchini, yellow squash, pink watermelon, apple, and potato that are genetically engineered. And those are listed on our website. And that you also avoid the products that are doused in glyphosate. So then you can avoid GMOs and Roundup in the times when you can't eat organic. And while you're on the site, consider joining our GMO-free community, which is free, our self-care advocate community, which helps support us, and the healthcare community, which is for physicians and other practitioners. Whoops. Now, we have achieved an amazing success educating consumers about the health dangers of GMOs. About 51% of US consumers say that they believe GMOs are unsafe, 8% worldwide. But there's a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is now there's gene editing, which is also creating GMOs, but it's so cheap and easy and readily available, the biotech industry, anyway, they've convinced governments to look the other way. It's faster, cheaper, and it's available in schools. If a lot of school kids are going to be given, or already being given, assignments to genetically engineer microorganisms in their science room. And of course, they're not going to be able to protect it from escaping. It's going to cause a lot of contamination. Once things are in the environment, you can't recall them. And GMOs are prone to unpredictable side effects. And Nature described CRISPR gene editing results as chromosomal mayhem. And yet, we don't know all that. There's a cow that was gene edited to be hornless, and they discovered 2.5 years after they were starting to grow out herds that the cow DNA also now had bacterial genes in it. So it was a complete failure. Here's another example where mice that were gene edited actually had goat DNA and cow DNA and bacterial DNA accidentally added into their genome from the process of gene editing. Here's a better way to find out about gene editing. Go to responsibletechnology.org and invest 6 minutes and look at our animated journey into the DNA to see what happens during gene editing. It's called 7 Reasons Why Gene Editing is Dangerous, and unpredictable. And it's just 6 minutes, and I highly recommend it. Please share it. But the industry convinced the governments to look the other way, pretending that gene editing is safe and predictable. So, for example, a company that was producing gene-edited CRISPR mushrooms sent a note to the USDA and said, do you need to look at this? And the USDA said, nope, it's not in our regulations. 2.5 years later, we discover that the technique that they used, which is to knock out genes, fails 1/3 of the time and can sometimes produce allergens or toxins. That was never checked. Fortunately, those mushrooms are not on the market. But other things are. Conscious Foods introduced CRISPR gene-edited leafy greens like mustard greens. Right now they're available through like food services, so they can avoid labeling. So there's a chance now, because the biotech industry has convinced governments to not require testing or labeling. They're like stealth GMOs that almost anyone can create, and it could theoretically replace our food supply, and we wouldn't know why we're getting sick. Worse, it could replace nature. You see, we're at a time now where we've given the keys to the kingdoms to virtually everyone. Almost anyone can, it costs like less than $2,000 to buy a CRISPR kit. You can create your own GMO, and in the US, you can sell them or give them away, feed them to people without any government oversight. So we're in a situation where it's like a gene rush going on, that companies are trying to get their products onto the market quickly and to start making money before their patent expires. And we have students, scientists, entrepreneurs, and major companies using the gene editing technology and incrementally releasing it into the environment. And this is the generation that could replace nature, so future generations don't inherit the products of the billions of years of evolution like we did, but more a combination of natural and man-made. Now, here's the big problem. Gene editing is low cost and easily accessible. It's widely deregulated. Once released, it persists in the environment, and it's prone to side effects. Those 4 things are a recipe for disaster. Think about it. Create whatever organism you want. Don't test it to see what happens. Release it in the environment, put it in the food supply. It'll be there in 10,000 years. And it might be very different compared to what was released. And then do it with as many plants, animals, and microorganisms as you can. So that's what we're facing, a tremendous potential disaster. So this generation's mandate is to protect all living beings and all future generations. Now, which GMO carries the greatest threat? This is where we decided to put our attention, the microbiome. The microbiome is particularly important. It co-evolved with humans so that we actually rely on the microbiome to perform many of the functions. We've outsourced maybe 90% of our daily metabolic and chemical functions to the microbes living inside us. We can get away with a measly 23,000 genes because we use the genetic information of the 3.5 million genes from the microbes living inside us. And the state of our microbes dictates our health. It's so important that what happens at the time of birth is stunning. In the second trimester, milk digesting bacteria move into the birth canal. It inoculates the baby during the birthing process. So now the baby has the bacteria that was specifically designed for them that entered the birth canal. Then the baby starts to nurse. The first bacteria that come out of the milk removes the oxygen from the gut to prepare for anaerobic respiration and bifidobacteria, which is necessary for the health of the baby. About 27% of the of the gut bacteria comes from the milk, 10% from just the breast, the skin, and it inoculates the baby. The milk itself has large amounts that are entirely indigestible by the baby. They're not designed for the baby. They're designed to feed the gut bacteria, to make it into the colon, to feed the bacteria. If the baby gets sick, the microbes in the saliva feed back through the nipple to the mother and change the formula of the milk until the baby is recovered. So the microbes are part of this communication system. When there's breast cancer, bacteria move into the breast to contain it. And Alzheimer's, fungus moves into the brain to protect. We have this micro Jedi army working on our behalf at all times. It is so important, and yet we are now releasing genetically engineered microbes that we have no idea what their impacts are. Well, there's 1 trillion estimated microbes out there, and we've only characterized less than 1%. So we are babes in the woods, completely ignorant of this vast intelligence that supports life on Earth. If you go to responsibletechnology.org, there's a 16-minute film, Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle. I highly recommend it. It talks about, for example, a genetically engineered microbe that was almost released, 2 weeks away from being released, that theoretically could have ended terrestrial plant life on the planet. Now, if you release a microbe in the environment, they travel. We didn't need COVID-19 to tell us that. They can travel around the world. They mutate. So what you release may not look anything like what is still there. They swap genes. A lot of people don't know that. Big swap meets. They'll take a gene that a kid puts in a high school class. It's now in the soil or the air or a human, and that gene will now go into the microbiome that's present there. They can damage or collapse ecosystems. Now, how important are the microbes? We talked about human microbes. They're critical to keeping us healthy. The algae produces most of the world's oxygen. Soil microbes draw down the carbon, and fungal networks transport nutrients between trees and plants. We're talking about major foundational systems that we're putting at risk. We're now flooding over 40 million acres probably of agriculture with genetically engineered microbes. We have synthetic biology turning little microbes into factories by sticking genes in them to produce proteins that we can use to create enzymes and Impossible Burger and amino acids and supplements and industrial chemicals. But then you have these yeasts or algae or bacteria that are producing those. What if that escapes? Here's a scenario. You take bacteria and you stick in a gene from the opium poppy to create opioids. So now you're creating opioids through synthetic biology, but that bacteria escapes. And now some bacteria in the environment is producing opioids. And now we eat it. And the gene that produces the opioids ends up transferring into our gut bacteria. If it produces some survival advantage, now it's permanently producing opioids or CBD or industrial chemicals. The scenarios we can create are horrible and yet all plausible. There's also companies consciously producing probiotics and medicines that they don't really know the full extent of, and they give it to an individual. The individual will poop it out, and now it's an environmental release, and now everyone's exposed to it, not just every human, but all living beings and all future generations, if it survives. Academia is probably the biggest source of variety of genetically engineered microbes because students and faculty are just producing all sorts of them. So this is what we are facing. We must lock it down, and we think that we need new regulations, laws, and treaties. So we would like to fund a global emergency program to protect against this, which we consider to be the most serious existential threat that no one knows about. We want to develop the science and create policy recommendations, build a global coalition, and spread the message through popular culture. You know, the pandemic turns out to have a silver lining here because everyone now knows about microbes travel and mutate. And there's a big outcry against gain of function, and that makes sense. Why, why enhance a microbe that might escape if it could cause a pandemic? But they're ignoring biology in that we shouldn't be releasing and genetically engineering even common microbes that are part of our gut, soil, air, environment, because if you change their function, you can collapse ecosystems or create long-time damage of health. So we're looking for natural allies, human health movement, regenerative agriculture, environment, ocean conservation, invasives. Even national security is freaked out about the ability of individuals to create viruses. So we have a page on our site where we have some leaders in functional medicine and healthcare saying we're trying to protect the microbiome. We'd like to fund a group like this in every one of those other areas, the natural allies, and develop materials. We're kind of out of money right now, so things are stalled. Not the biotech industry, they're not stalled. They're going pedal to the metal. But we want to create international treaties and new laws. We want to do it with this, interestingly enough, this government and this, there's some receptivity there for what we have, but we need to capitalize on it. So we need the most influential, creative, and brilliant, and most caring people to join the team. That means not just doing something, but also funding this effort. So I would like to encourage you to invest in the future by investing in the effort to protect the future from genetically engineered microorganisms. And while we're at it, we'll also protect the food supply, all living beings, and all future generations. Thank you very much. All right, that ends our show tonight. We're going to stop sharing and we're going to now take questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I really appreciate all the information that you shared. I might have nightmares from it, but I definitely
My job.
I appreciate it. So we're gonna go ahead and begin the Q&A. You should, where people can find out about your work, the responsibletechnology.org website.
Yeah, look at responsibletechnology.org.
Mhm.
That's where you go.
And books, same site.
You know, my books are, my Seeds of Deception is 22 years old. It's a fun read. It doesn't get old because it describes how these things were put on the market. You know, you can go to seedsofdeception.com and find that. Genetic Roulette, which is right over my shoulder, that's from 2007. It's also dated, but it's easy to read and get through and gives a nice foundation. Of the two, I think Seeds of Deception is funner and more infuriating. You know, that's more of a right brain book, where Genetic Roulette is more of a left brain book. But I would say if you're looking to learn more, the website and the film, secretingredientsfilm.com. That's the like quick version. And if you also have friends that you want to convince to go organic, that's better than this conversation, than this whole presentation. That's actual people that switch to organic, and you can see what happened to them. And the doctors explain that it happens to people in their practices as well. The scientists explain why. There's animations that depict what the scientists are talking about. Nearly everyone that watches Secret Ingredients that I did with Amy Hart decides to change their diet.
And is that available through your website?
Secretingredientsfilm.com.
And so, okay. So at the end of this presentation, just want to kind of start off there. You kind of talked about, needing funds and whatnot. Have you seen, especially considering what happened over the last few years, have you seen the movement growing? Is it stagnant, or people want to put their head in the sand? What are you seeing with regard to building, a response?
The heyday was about 13 years ago. Prop 37 to get it, labeled in California. Then we had labeling battles for the next 2 years in different states. We had 117 different local organizations with over 10,000 activists that we were supporting. It was a big deal. It was new. And then the biotech industry nixed state labeling, kind of caused a big depression in the local movements. But it became less top of mind. People thought, okay, I'm avoiding GMOs now. I don't have to think about it. But then gene editing came and they tried to keep it quiet. And they worked with governments one at a time to get deregulation. Australia, India, Japan, England, United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, they're working on the EU now. So when that happens, especially if the EU capitulates, we're at a time that this is a pivotal point in human history, and it's not very well understood. So it's not a lively movement. We've lost nearly all of our funding because the popularity of the GMO, anti-GMO movement is gone, and we're dealing with microbes where even though it's the greatest danger, it's not top of mind. It's not where people normally want to spend their money. They want to save the life of someone starving in a country that has a famine. We're trying to protect all living beings and all future generations, but it's a different visual. So I'm for both, protecting the starving kid and also the long game of protecting biodiversity and keeping nature, keeping the integrity of nature.
How about the popularity of organic eating? Has that gone up despite the decreased popularity of the GMO movement?
Yeah, it has.
Okay.
A lot more people are eating organic. The biggest shift to organic comes with parents of young kids. Keep my kids healthy. I'll do it for them, but not for me. A lot of farmers get sick, and then they realize they got to switch to organic if they want to survive in terms of growing, and then they realize what they're eating. Yeah, the organic movement continues to grow significantly, and it is an oasis of GMOs, of not having GMOs or Roundup. We of course need to keep that strong and keep the standards high. And there's some regenerative organic now and real organic. There's some other certifications that are bumping up the criteria.
Are the gene edited food or organisms, is that under the classification of GMO?
It is, for those of us that know, of course it's a GMO. Legally, it's considered a GMO in the European context, but now they're trying to undo that. In the United States, they're under the influence of the biotech industry, so they call GMOs those that have transgenes, foreign genes inserted. So that gives them oh, it's not a GMO, it's non-GMO. It is a GMO. We should call it a GMO. We have to recognize that they're trying to lie to us, disinform us, and pretend that it's non-GMO.
And does that mean that these gene edited foods can they be labeled organic in the United States?
Not organic, but they don't have to be labeled as GMO. We have a very weak labeling system in the United States. It was basically it has more loopholes than requirements, and one of the loopholes is gene editing. Something could be a gene edited mustard, which is out there, and no one would know. There's gene edited fish now in Japan, 3 of them. No one knows. They're not labeled. If something is 100%, if something is genetically engineered and sold in a supermarket, and it's not gene edited, then it has to be labeled. But the way they label it is to try and confuse you by saying made from bioengineered ingredients or bioengineered. They don't want to use the word GMO because no one knows what bioengineered is. There's a lot of people that would avoid GMOs, but they'll go for something that's bioengineered because it sounds exciting. But that's the way that they're trying to protect market share and allow and deprive people of knowledgeable choice.
So, okay, so what I'm hearing is that the organic label still protects us from gene edited foods. Is that?
Yeah.
So
And the other thing is the non-GMO project, they're really good at trying to figure out what is gene edited and which also uses synthetic biology. They're looking at over 500 companies right now that use synthetic biology to try and track to see if it's being put in the food supply. No one has to declare. The Impossible Burger declared it. They use, yeast that has a gene from soybeans that produce a protein that's normally produced in in the root of the soy to turn their Impossible Burger red. It's possibly very, very dangerous. They also use Roundup Ready soy sprayed with Roundup. So friends, don't let friends eat the Impossible Burger. But there's other things you don't know. So the Non-GMO Project is the best research arm to make sure that there's nothing sliding in. So when you see Non-GMO Project and organic together, that's kind of the gold standard. The Non-GMO Project does not protect against glyphosate because wheat is non-GMO. They don't test for glyphosate in the Non-GMO Project. Oats are non-GMO, but actually there is a wheat that's GMO now in Argentina, but it hasn't been sold in the United States yet. So organic is number one. Organic and non-GMO Project together is actually the better combination.
Is Beyond safe from the issues that Impossible?
Yes, Beyond Burger is different. By the way,
Okay.
you do have some hands up. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, there was one question I want to ask that also an audience member brought up, which is the Maha movement talks about getting America healthy again. There are certain aspects of the movement that suggest they're talking about with industry, kind of getting in, like the revolving door, like destroying the revolving door or whatnot. Do you see that movement where you actually have somebody in power that at least gives lip service to, health? Is that connected at all with the GMO movement?
RFK Jr. knows about glyphosate. He was one of the attorneys in the team that defended Lee Johnson, who was the first person to sue Bayer Monsanto for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma due to using Roundup. And I know that Robert Kennedy Jr. is aware of the details. He's aware of the data. He had to learn it to be part of the team. I've met him. He interviewed me about GMOs and Roundup and the microorganisms on his show some years ago, Ring of Fire, and was, so he's aware of all this. And so we have a position, a person in the cabinet who may be able to spearhead something unprecedented in this regard. So I know some people that are providing him with information. I'm working, pulling summaries together, see if we can get information. There's hope. There's hope, but at this point today, I haven't seen anything substantive, but there is the possibility that we will have more movement than we've seen in the past.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and we just have a few minutes left, so we need to keep it quick. So James, if you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question of Jeffrey.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
James.
I was going to ask you if you can go into a little more detail about the organic movement at the federal level. You were just talking about RFK Jr. I've been eating organic for many years, and it just seems like it's so profitable now to slap that word organic on food, and I'm worried, and I'm seeing that the products that I'm buying and whatnot, I'm questioning whether they're not really truly organic. So could you maybe give some advice to someone like me that is trying to shop and eliminate all those toxins and shop wisely?
Yes, thank you, James. Two things about organic. One is fraud potential, the other is standards. You can't just put the word organic on a product. It's a legal definition. You have to meet the requirements. And if you put the word organic on your product, then and it's not really organic, then you risk being fined and whatnot. You find more of that would come from international imports, where it's harder to track, but certainly a smaller percentage, a small percentage of all the overall organic. But there is the potential for fraud, and it's higher in the imports. There's been some fraud in the United States. The bigger companies have a lot to lose if they allow this kind of fraud. So the bigger companies, the bigger brands, tend to be more reliable, because if someone does an investigation and turns out they're using the word organic and it's fraudulent, they can lose market share and reputation, etc.
Thank you.
The second point, though, is the standards. We need to keep the standards high, and there's efforts to try and reduce the standards as some of these big companies buy up some of the smaller organics and then try and make it easier by sort of fudging on the standards. So if there's ever a chance to sign a petition or support that, do that.
So we just have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask, one, once you eat this stuff, is there stuff that stays in your body, and how do we detox ourselves from all of this stuff and avoid the health ramifications of it?
Well, I want to remind you that chart that I was using over and over and over again was about people who had switched to organic or non-GMO and got better. It's also the case with animals that are force-fed GMOs. There's mice that were fed GMO soy for 8 months and had damage to their liver and I think the pancreas and the testicles. And then they put them on non-GM soy for a month and they started to get better. So there is a repair mechanism. In the film Secret Ingredients, there was a family of 5 that had 21 chronic conditions between them. And they tried all sorts of things, and gluten and lack of commercial dairy and all this stuff, and their symptoms reduced, but they were still battling 21 chronic conditions. When they switched to organic, the conditions went away. The autistic boy was no longer on the spectrum, and he's no longer exhibiting those symptoms. And so it was like, there is a recovery mechanism that when the burden is removed, the healing can happen. It's not the case with every disease. As far as the removal from the body, glyphosate is water soluble. Most leaves in the urine, but some can deposit itself in the organs, and then some into the bones, and then it gets in the marrow, and that's where the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma happens. The diseases that are associated with glyphosate tend to be, cancers tend to be the ones where the glyphosate gathers. So, but it can be brought out. There's products that can help detox. There's things like saunas, and there's things like, well, there's plenty of things that I like to track and share, but we don't have time for that.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for all the information that you shared. It was really eye-opening, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
If we can unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation.
This guy in the closet
every day at 5:30.
Jeffrey. Oh, okay. I never heard.